Maggie Berry.
Yes, indeed, Mr Speaker, still and always. Thank you very much. I rise to speak to the Tasman District Council Validation and Recovery of Certain Rates Bill. It is as its second reading and it's a local bill sponsored by Damien O'Connor. As other speakers have noted, this is yet another validation bill. We endured Kaipara, the horrors, the torture, the intense discussion, the pain of the taxpayers, the ratepayers I should say, although of course as the Speaker who just resumed her seat pointed out, because it has to be validated through Parliament, it becomes an expense that the taxpayers have to deal with. And one would caution, as the member sponsoring this bill did at the opening call on this debate, would caution all councils to learn from this and to listen to their ratepayers. And if things are not going well and there are grumbles and complaints, then for goodness sake, address the issues before they become a problem. Damien O'Connor pointed out at the outset that one of the issues around this is that Tasman District Council is a unitary council. So it doesn't have perhaps the same checks and balances as is provided by regional councils or other closer councils working in alongside. And perhaps had that occurred, then the silly mistake really of not including a map with the rates and therefore invalidating them would never have occurred. And I find that when I look at some of the correspondence, looking back over it now, because it was last winter when we heard this, many of the submissions on this bill. We heard 14 in all. One of them from Tasman District Council Mayor Richard Kempthorne really does get to the heart of the matter. The Council, he writes in his letter and part of his submission to us, fully acknowledges that we made an error in setting the 2006-7 rate for the Tata Beach Liger Bay stormwater urban drainage area. We regret that the error was made, and so say all of us. Mr Speaker, and the ratepayers of the area. The Mayor goes on to say that we also note that if we had included the required map, the rate would have been lawfully made and the rates would have been payable. So when you look at peel aside all of the other things that have been a problem in this, it comes down to a basic fundamental error, and that it has cost ratepayers tens of thousands of dollars, endless, countless hours, and some things are you can't measure the cost of the misery that many of the ratepayers have been through in that area over this. As others have before me, I would like to acknowledge Bob Schmucky. Without his energy, without his determination and effort, this case would not have got as far as it has. And when I call it a case, it almost is that, because there have been so many warring parties that have initially tried to say, not my fault, can't do anything about this. There's been a lot of obfuscation around the issue, and a lot of other issues have come into play. I know that there are aspects of this that the Select Committee agonised over, but we were not ultimately able to help some of the people who had issues around whether or not the stormwater should have been laid in the pipes in the areas that that some of the ratepayers wanted them to be. And I won't go into all of the detail of that because I think that others have tracked that over before me. But it is very much a warning to other councils. It is a warning to take heed of what you do, be very careful about your procedures and processes, and also to listen to your ratepayers, as I said a moment ago, and also I think to embrace the better government, local government reforms that this government is putting through. Part of those reforms is that we want local bodies, local councils to be really careful around their monitoring and improving of their own performances for their ratepayers. Perhaps the publicity around this bill will show other councils that their own processes may and will come under greater scrutiny. So the silver lining to this cloud really hanging over the Tasman ratepayers is the local government amendment bill that we have started to put through. I look back at some of the calls that were taken at that time, and as someone who has sat on the local government and environment select committee throughout the Kaipara hearings and now this bill, there are a number of issues that continue to come up. And Maurice Williamson, the Minister for Building and Construction, took a call on behalf of the then Minister of Local Government, Chris Tremaine, who I must say has done an excellent job of putting this through to this point. But he made the point in his call that although the bill that we're talking about, the Local Government Act Amendment Bill, is not specifically aimed at these worst case scenarios, Kaipara, Tasman District. It is really going to help out in those kind of situations and prevent them happening again. And that is my absolute belief in this. We don't propose really to discuss the details of the particular cases, but they do provide salutary lessons for us all, and that informs us as legislators. The bill and the legislation that we're passing around local government will address the lessons. The changes enacted will allow ministers to identify potential problems before they get too bad, before they get too expensive and almost insurmountable for the local people to deal with, which is why they have to come back to Parliament and be validated by us today. Our Local Government Act does introduce requirements for greater transparency in the management of infrastructure, and also a lot more discipline in the documentation of agreements for infrastructure that have to be provided not just by the council employees themselves and their elected representatives, but also by third parties who may be contracting and may be part of the problem. So all of these things are vitally important, and perhaps if Tasman District had the benefit of this legislation and the scrutiny and the requirements that comes with it, they might have made a better job of what they needed to do. One of the Green members took a call and said that on this side of the House there are crocodile tears being shed for ratepayers. That is absolutely incorrect. We have a genuine concern for ratepayers, for the rise in rates, as Jackie Dean pointed out in her call, and she's no stranger to putting through very good local bills as a member, because she represents her community and cares about what they say, and that is really the purpose of local bills. So she's no stranger to that. And as she pointed out, members of her own family who are on fixed incomes struggle in a big way with these kind of rates hikes and irresponsible spending, let alone problems that blow out as a result of absolute errors and incompetence in the case of Kaipara. And I think the Auditor General's Office in that case with Kaipara, as we discussed exhaustively at Select Committee, does have a case to answer, and their very large bill, which the Auditor General said was one of the most complicated she'd ever been involved with in her 20 years, and the office spent a phenomenal amount of time trying to deal with the inefficiencies of a local council who kept no paperwork, who didn't follow due process, who didn't do what their ratepayers elected them to do, which is to be good stewards and prudent managers of the funds that they were paid. So all of these sorts of things are important to keep in mind. In my own electorate on the North Shore, I'm very mindful that a lot of older people on fixed incomes have properties that have very expensive rates. That's the nature of the way we do the ratings, based on the land value and the improvements, of course. But, you know, people are finding that they're living in places that they can't actually, they're struggling to find the rates money that they need, and that's why local authorities, in particular councils, need to be very, very careful about what they spend their money on. And spraying it around and squandering it on for well-beings isn't going to get people where they need to be. And those are the kinds of things that actually need to be addressed in legislation. And this government has the courage of their convictions and the knowledge, as opposed to the wittering that's going on at the moment from the opposing benches. We have the knowledge and the competence and the ability to put through decent legislation that is aimed at helping the ratepayers. It's not aimed at puffing up local body people, as that member who's interjecting at the moment very much is, an individual who tends to think she does a much better job than her own ratepayers allow. And in fact, I don't think her own mother got elected on the basis of the legacy that was left for her by her daughter. It's a sad state of affairs. I know that the member has a very high opinion of herself as a list MP, but I know that that is not at all reflected by people in her own community. But there you go. We'll withdraw from the petty politics and the yapping. Let's suffice it to say that the Local Government Act and the Amendment Bill number 3 is going to work very, very well to making sure that problems that occurred at Kaipara, that occur at the Tasman District Council, validation and recovery of certain rates bill, that they won't occur again. And that's a very important part of why we as a government will continue to put through reforms despite the braying of the opposing forces. And that is why I support this local members bill. I support Damien O'Connor and what he's done. I acknowledge, as many have said, that we're making the best of a difficult situation. We're making it better, but we're not making it perfect. But we are doing our best. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Andrew Williams.
Mr. Speaker, I had to pull out my handkerchief from the last couple of minutes of that particular speech to wipe away the tears of laughter